So we have Piper Moretti. She's the co-founder and CEO of the Cryptic Group. And then we also have Carl Shusterman, is the founder of Shusterman Law Offices. And we have Sabina here in the back. Sabina. She's busy. And Ben Larson. And Debbie. Where's Debbie? So thank you guys for coming. I guess we'll get right into it. It's kind of an informal process. I'm going to ask questions, and these guys are going to discuss them, and then at the end we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. So please hold your questions. So, Carl, is it difficult to get a visa to come to the United States?
Depends. Just like every lawyer will tell you. So it depends whether you're coming to visit the U.S., whether you're coming to study, whether you're coming to work or invest in the U.S. They all have different qualifications. There's, on our webpage, I have it all, it's alphabetical from A to U, all the different types of temporary visas. So, I mean, to start with somebody who wants to just visit the U.S., I mean, if you're from Europe or Japan or one of the wealthy countries in the world, super easy. You don't even need a visa to come to the United States. It's called the ESTA program. On the other hand, if you're from a third world country and maybe you're single and not wealthy or something, it may be very difficult to come to the U.S. because they will think, if we give this guy a visa, he will probably come and work in the United States and never go back. To move to another category like the students, it's become more difficult. I mean, we have a lot of foreign students in the United States. When I go to my old campus at UCLA, and sometimes I'm one of the few people speaking English walking around the campus. But for the first time in 30 years, this last year, the number of foreign students has fallen. The administration has made it more difficult to get a student visa to come to the U.S. I think that's kind of a bad practice, but that's just what's going on. And then there's all these different types of work visas, and they have become, the law hasn't changed, but the administration's made it more difficult to get a work visa in the last couple of years than in the 40 years before that I've been practicing. But, it varies. Each visa has its own qualifications.
Okay, and I think we'll get into the meat and potatoes of specific visas in a little while. In working with international clients, what are some of the immigration-related issues that we should be aware of as realtors?
Yeah, well, when you work with an international client, it is going to depend what type of visa they're on in the U.S. If they're a permanent resident of the United States, then it's almost like being a citizen. They can do pretty much, they can't vote or serve on a jury, but they can buy real estate, they can have their companies, they can do what they want. They're on a temporary visa, it's a little different because temporary visas mean it's going to run out after a certain number of months or years. So if you have somebody who's not going to be able to stay in the U.S., that obviously can be a problem. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Piper to talk about blockchain, which, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin has been pretty exciting over the last few years.
Yeah.
Piper, how have you seen Bitcoin influence in real estate in recent years?
Oh, boy. I got to speak in broad strokes here. I mean, it's going to be changing. It's ever changing. But we're at the very, very beginning of of the possibilities. That can actually change the whole dynamic of how we do business in real estate. It's a brand new way of being able to pay for real estate. Obviously. It is, Bitcoin. How many know? I got to take the temperature here. So everybody knows about Bitcoin. Okay. Are there any actual traders in here? Okay. How many people have heard of blockchain? Do you know the difference between blockchain and crypto? Okay, so we got one. So we might have to back up a little bit and, do like a quick overview. But yeah, I mean, I've done, 5 transactions using Bitcoin, completely legal. It was all Bitcoin to cash. And this kind of opens up the floodgates, actually, for foreign buyers to come in and buy U.S. real estate. And we're lucky in the fact that we're in a hot market here in L.A. It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter what the market's like. Where it's still very, highly sought after. So, it's a really good time to be in this space right now.
So what do we need to be asking or advising our international buyers regarding crypto?
Okay. I get a lot of calls there's 2 sides to this. I get a lot of calls from potential buyers and potential sellers. I've got this great place. I'm not kidding. It was like a chateau in Switzerland somewhere or something like that. And my first question is, great, I need to see paperwork on this. I need to see like verification of like, do you actually own this? Because there's a lot of crooks out there that think that they can say, oh yeah, I own this when this particular property, and they think that because it's in Bitcoin or whatever coin that they want to accept, they're if they supply like so much information, then then they can maybe con somebody out of Bitcoin or whatever. So I do my due diligence in making sure that these properties and these people are real, and there are practices that do that. There are companies platforms that I use, So I would just basically just start with the basic questions that you would even ask a buyer or a seller in traditional real estate. Are you qualified? Do you have the funds? Do you whose property is this? Do we have a deed? Do we have all that stuff? So it's very, very similar. But there's like that extra added layer of verification since you are dealing with somebody across the globe.
Okay, so we're going to go back to Carl. So obviously, if someone's coming to the United States to purchase property, what is the appropriate visa for an international buyer who wants to come to the U.S. to purchase property either for investment or personal use?
Well, if they're coming, there are investment visas. There's something called an E-2. About 60-something countries around the world allow people to come into the U.S., start their own businesses, employ American workers. So if they're from one of those countries, and by the way, a couple of the big countries in the world, China and India, do not have treaties with the U.S. We do have a list on our website of the 60-something countries. The newest ones are New Zealand and Israel just have recently signed treaties. So that would be a good way to come into the U.S. There's also something you've probably heard of called EB-5. The EB-5 are people that are getting green cards through investment, and the amounts were $1 million, but if you were in a high unemployment area or a rural area, it was $500,000, and those amounts have not changed since 1990. But they are going to change on the 21st of November, so it'll be $900,000 instead of $500,000, and I think it's like $1.8 million for the other investors.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah.
Well, a sign that our real estate market is very good in Los Angeles. Greg is here with all that traffic. Greg Karns is a real estate attorney and partner at Cox Castle Nicholson. So basically, we're doing a round robin thing here.
Terrific. Okay. Well, so good morning, everybody. I'm sorry. Can you all set on? Okay. All right. So again, sorry for being a little late. As I said, I'm a partner at Cox Castle Nicholson. We are a real estate law firm, probably one of the largest in the country that specializes in real estate. My practice generally is working with foreign investors looking to get a little toehold in the real estate market here, so for the last. I figured we'd do a snapshot of where things are at in 2019 with foreign investment. And the last 2 quarters, the first 2 quarters of 2019 have resulted in a net sale of commercial real estate by foreign investors. Just by a little bit. But it is the first time this has happened in almost 7 years. I think there are a lot of reasons for this. Probably chief among them is it's been a long time, this cycle. We're in a very mature part of the real estate cycle, and a lot of investors have achieved their goals. They're ready to take their profits. At the same time, the U.S. dollar is very strong, so that has 2 impacts. One, when they sell, they get the exchange rate is very favorable if they're going to go back into their home currency. On the other hand, it makes it difficult for them to make new investments in the U.S. with such a strong dollar. So I think that there are a lot of reasons. I guess the other reason is political uncertainty. We probably don't have time to go into all that.
Yeah, well, so I'll continue to ask questions.
Yeah.
But you already hit 2 of them. How has the current economic trends in China impacted investment abroad, specifically in the U.S.?
Well, actually, U.S. investment from China, real estate investment from China, has been curtailed since the end of 2016. This is not a tariff issue. This is not a Trump issue. Between 2015 and 2016, a quarter of the foreign reserves in China left China, and China got very concerned about this. So at the end of 2016 into 2017, they put policies in place that basically restricted investment in what we might call speculative real estate. So most of the investment that we were seeing coming from China ended in early 2017. That's not to say there hasn't been. The related project in downtown Los Angeles is funded by Chinese capital, and that's really got started in earnest this year. So there is a way still that it works, but it's not like it was, and I think it's not likely to change soon. We're seeing Chinese capital coming in through Singapore into maybe distribution and warehouse plays, industrial, but that's seen as less speculative and more of core value sort of real estate.
Can you discuss a little bit how Opportunity Zones has affected global investments in California?
Sure. Opportunity zones are designated parcels of real estate in California, all over the country, that have, if they are acquired and placed in service within certain timetables, the theory goes, after 10 years, the gain on the investment that goes into them will be gone. Not deferred like a 1031, but you just won't owe the tax anymore. So as a result, most Opportunity Zone properties had an immediate bump in pricing. I think people in real estate think that this is more of an investment for internet gazillionaires who, because you can shelter that gain. You can shelter, it works for non-real estate gain. We still see most people who have real estate gains doing 1031 exchanges. That being said, again, you're probably all seeing Opportunity Zone funds springing up. We've worked on a fund right now. We've sold into funds. So it's certainly something getting a lot of interest. but I think that it's going to be sort of finite in its application in the real estate world, and it's more for non-real estate investors.
Great. So going back to Carl, what are some of the pitfalls and mistakes made during the application process for visas?
Where do I start? So, I mean, right now, when people come in as professionals, they come through their jobs to the United States, there used to be a denial, or we call it RFE, a request for evidence rate of under 5%, and that's gone up to 35%. So they're saying, okay, so you have a degree in your country, a bachelor's degree in computer science, and company X is paying you $85,000 to be a IT worker, but we're not sure it's really a professional job. Justify why that degree is really necessary. So it's really, driving immigration attorneys crazy, responding to all these RFEs and denials. Another thing is people who are getting their green cards through jobs, they're supposed to, when you get it in the U.S., it's a process called adjustment of status, and you're supposed to show that you've pretty much always been in legal status, and really like 99% of those cases have always been granted. But now we're finding that you go to the interview, and well, first of all, there's interviews now. It used to be for 24 years there were no interviews for the employment-related adjustments. Now you're interviewed, but not only are you interviewed, but the questions come up like, so we see that you were going to USC in 1992, and we looked at your transcripts, and it looked like you dropped a class, so you weren't really a full-time student, so therefore you're not able to adjust your status. And so these things are going on, and immigration attorneys have to look back, not just the last year or the last couple of years, but ever since that person came to the United States. And then as far as investments, for investments, it's the thing that they really bear down on is the source of funds. The EB-5 program, when it passed in 1990, was very controversial. People said, well, you shouldn't be able to buy a green card to, that shouldn't be the way we operate the system. What if drug cartel people take their money and buy green cards? So they put this system where they could go back and say, okay, so you put $500,000 into this investment in an office tower in downtown LA. Where did you get that $500,000? Well, I sold my home in China and I got the money. Well, where did you get the money to buy your home in the first place? And they go back and back and back. So it's just something that you have to be cognizant of. Yeah.
On another issue, you talked a little bit about visas and then getting a green card from the EB-5. What are other options for people to get a green card?
Okay. Well, I guess one of the most common ones is marriage. People marry U.S. citizens, a couple 100,000 people a year. People get their green cards also. Our immigration system, for reasons I don't have time to go into, is predominantly family-based rather than employment or investment-based. So your brother, if he's a citizen, can sponsor you, although it takes a number of years. Your parents can sponsor you. Your kids, once they turn 21, they can sponsor you. There's all these different family categories. And then to a smaller extent, it's employment. Out of the 1.1 million people who immigrate to the U.S. every year, 140,000 of them come in through employment, but that's not employees, 140,000, because that includes their spouses and their kids. Really, it's like about 80,000 people. I personally would like to see that amount upped, but so far that hasn't happened. So you can get sponsored. You may be a multinational executive. You may be somebody of extraordinary ability. You may be an outstanding professor or researcher. But if you don't meet those qualifications, then your employer has to go through a process called PERM. And with the PERM process, they advertise their job, they show that they cannot find a qualified American to do the job, and then you eventually end up getting a green card. And then there are a couple other programs. There's the EB-5 investor program. There's a green card lottery. Crazy, but there's a lottery, and 55,000 people get their green cards through the lottery. And then there's people who come in through asylum or come into the U.S. as refugees, and they end up applying for a green card.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, back to Piper. So with 1.1 million people coming to the country every year as immigrants, obviously we're dealing with a lot of different cultures, and people approach business differently. Mm-hmm. What is the most common mistake made by realtors when representing someone from overseas?
As far as, like I said, I kind of touched on this earlier, as far as I'm concerned, KYC and AML, would know your customer and anti-money laundering practices. And there is no way for us to actually be able to do that ourselves. I mean, unless we're like really blockchain, proficient. But like I said, there are companies out there, like I use BitPay and also a bank out of London to convert the funds, whether it's Bitcoin or another fiat currency, maybe yen to US dollars, but they do their due diligence in verification. They ask for, all kinds of documents, passports, all that stuff that, like banks would normally do, except, like I said before, it's like an extra added layer of security. And so like that's the kind of stuff we need to look for. We need to, make sure that we're like, we're dealing with a human, and a lot of investors in that are supposedly in cryptocurrency, they like it because they are behind a veil. It's more private. But if they are serious investors, they will step out from behind the veil. So we go so far. I mean, I've spent a lot of trial and error doing this, but unless they're willing to step outside and prove their identity, I won't work with them.
So typically, other than Bitcoin, what's a typical way for people to bring funds into the United States?
All kinds. There's a thing called hot swap, and basically, it's swapping the currency. Like I said, yen for U.S. dollars. I have I use a bank out of London that does this for a relatively, comparatively cheap fee. It's about 5%. But if somebody's really serious about getting their funds, through the channels, into the U.S., that's one good legal way of doing it. Bitcoin's another way, and again, it's completely legal. It just depends on who you're transferring it to, and you are able to source those funds back on the blockchain infinitum. So,
okay, back to Greg. Regarding fiscally, how much money is typically allowed to go in and out of the country for reporting purposes?
In and out of the United States? Yeah. I'm not sure there's really a typical amount that goes in and out of that can go in and out of the United States. And again, remember the United States, from a tax standpoint, will tax you on your worldwide income. So the fact that, we have clients who are not U.S. taxpayers who have to deal with U.S. impacts, their investments, but we have clients who are U.S. taxpayers. I do work for a U.S. taxpayer who has a hotel company in China, and he pays U.S. tax on those activities in China. His problem, actually, I'm interested in listening to what you're saying. His problem is that even though it's not a Chinese company, his capital is locked up, in a sense, in China, because it's all in RMB, it's in Chinese currency. There's a big cost. He's not restricted, he's not a Chinese company. He can turn that into U.S. currency, but right now there's a significant cost, more than 5%. probably with taxes and fees closer to 20% than 5%, to turn that currency into U.S. dollars. So that's a real impediment for companies who are right now in China that are seeking to do more business here. And I think that's something that will change, maybe sooner than China's restrictions on speculative real estate, because I think for China to really enter a world stage, become a world economy, its currency has to become a world currency.
And of course, China has restrictions on how much individuals can take out of the country.
It was $50,000. Some people tell me that that's now in play, and that's been changed. And that's a lot of foreign students, Chinese students who are here. That was how they were here. But that has, in the current economic and geopolitical environment, those funds are getting more difficult to bring over, actually.
So when individuals buy in the United States, when is it beneficial for them to form a corporation?
That's part of what I'd say can be very unique tax plans. What I would say is it's pretty much never beneficial to own real estate in a corporation. LLCs really are the way to go. Foreign investors may have a corporate umbrella, which sort of acts as shields from both information and create the U.S. taxpayer that the U.S. government will need. But in terms of owning real estate, as a rule, you should really own real estate in LLCs.
Excellent. So back to Carl. Recently, it's become very popular to have dual citizenship for people that either had family that were born abroad or their parents were born abroad. How does the U.S. government look upon a U.S. citizen becoming a resident of another country? And what are the pros and cons of doing so?
Well, I mean, dual citizenship's always been accepted by the United States. There are countries around. Every country has their own rules about it. I remember, I think it was in probably late 1970s or early 1980s, Canada did not recognize dual citizenship. So, people would come to our office and they'd be Canadians and we'd have to advise them, well, you can naturalize and become an American citizen, but you're going to have to give up your Canadian citizen. And they were, oh my God, like I'm getting older, what's going to happen to my health care that the government's going to pay? Canada did change their policy, but you really have to look at the specific country where the person's from and see whether they recognize dual citizenship or whether they don't. I'm not a tax attorney, but I remember we had a fairly famous actor in the office years ago, and came in and wanted to turn his temporary visa into a green card, and he was so popular that I had like every secretary in the office wanted to spend 15 minutes writing out part of his form so they could meet the guy. And then at the end of the day, we got a call from his tax attorney in Century City saying, are you nuts? You're going to make him a permanent resident? I go, well, yeah, he came in for that. And they said, no, we have his money parked in the Cayman Islands and this and that, and he'll have to pay taxes on worldwide income if he becomes a permanent resident. So I'll let Greg or the tax attorneys talk about that part of it.
Yeah, well, I was going to say it's unusual for people to subject themselves to U.S. taxation.
So, Carl, how can we protect ourselves from, as more people come to the country, obviously you got people that are come up with different scams and fraud when involved with an international transaction.
How can we protect ourselves from that?
As far as talking to our clients and vetting them a little bit.
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know that any of that though relates to immigration law. you know? I mean, I think, you know, you have to do the same thing you're going to do if, you know, Joe Smith, who lives down the block from you, comes up with an investment idea, or you're going to buy a house for him or a property from him. I don't know that it really varies according to their particular country.
Well, you know, recently there's been a lot of, with escrow and title,
Uh-huh.
wire fraud. So, you know, particularly like in the Soviet Union, people are sending people emails to individuals that are in escrow and tell them to wire the funds.
Oh,
and
boy.
the money's disappeared.
Interesting. Yeah.
Okay, Piper, are there any restrictions on foreign buyers giving their agent gifts?
Gosh, I hope not. No, not that I actually no. I mean, as long as it's like, you know, within, like, it doesn't, like, you know, violate, like, you know, RESPA and, you know, NAR, you know, regulations and stuff like that. I can't imagine, unless you guys know something more than I do. You know, it's not like I've gotten a Lamborghini or anything as a thank you gift. So.
All right, have you had an opportunity to deal much with referral fees from international real estate individuals? And how's that handled?
Yeah, you know, for me, it's handled through my brokerage, like any other referral fee would. You know, I just I also do consulting, you know, as a side thing that doesn't have to, you know, goes through my DBA and not necessarily the brokerage, separate thing there. But you know, it's all on the up and up. And yeah, I mean, when I've got a couple of properties that we've got listed, you know, in other countries. You know, one's in the Philippines and one's in Panama. You know, I need boots on the ground over there. So, you know, because I don't have the time or energy to learn real estate law in all these different countries. So, yeah, you know, for that in particular, I would just, you know, probably take a consulting fee because it wouldn't necessarily, like, run through my brokerage.
Excellent, Greg. So regarding more local markets, regarding Los Angeles, can you discuss the transformation of downtown and how that metro line has impacted global investment?
Sure. Well, I think I personally think that if you look at this real estate cycle in Los Angeles, this last 10 years, it's been a story of downtown Los Angeles by and large. Really some significant development and largely focused in downtown LA. But what I would say is if you look at the next 10 years, it's going to be the metro line that leads investment and leads the monumental development in Los Angeles. And if you look right now along that metro line, you see on La Cienega that the Carmel Partners project, the radio station, that's, I mean, initially that was, the entitlement for that was can't be higher, it couldn't be taller than the metro line. I mean, obviously, you see that office building, it's a lot taller. But I mean, that's a major project, and anybody familiar with that area knows that's the first of a lot of stuff happening in that area. You've got a nursery, you've got old useless retail that will all give way for something more like Carmel Partners. And then you go a little bit further, and you've got the West Side Pavilion, the Hudson Pacific project. That will also be transformational, I think, on the west side. A little further, you have Martin Cadillac, which has been entitled. It's just hasn't found the right buyer yet, and then, you know, take it down to the stadium. So and just the metro line. Well, let me not say metro. If you look at the build out of our transit and the airport, just those two projects, you're looking at another 20 to $25 billion of spending over the next 6 to 8 years, just on those two projects. So that's why I would say that it's that metro line to the airport that's really going to transform the city for the next 10 years.
That's fascinating. So speaking about that, when you have clients coming to purchase property in the United States, you talk a little bit about the LLC. Can you discuss a little bit about whether a corporation, sole proprietor, partnership, or a REIT is beneficial in the up and downside of each option.
And yes, all those things can be beneficial, and a lot of it depends upon where the clients are coming from. We do work with an Australian group, and they invest here as a private REIT, and a very complicated tax structure that brings them from Australia to invest in the United States. I mean, somebody needs to pay tax. You can't get out of here tax-free. You need a taxpayer. That's why for foreign investment structures, we often will see a corporation at the exit point from the U.S. It doesn't have to be a corporation. Some things that are popular with some foreign investors is a creature called portfolio loans. These are a creature of the U.S. tax system, which I find to be unbelievable. But portfolio loans, if they're done properly, allow the lender to get its interest, so its profit on its loan, tax-free, with no withholding. And finding ways out of withholding, are key to every foreign investor. So again, it really depends upon where the investment's coming from to figure out the right structure. The good news is once you figure it out, you can use it over and over again.
Excellent. Carl, so you hit on some of these, but what are the steps and costs involved for a foreign national to establish residency?
Yeah, well, again, it depends on which way are they going, through the marriage route, the employment route, the investment route. The investment route is obviously the most costly, not only in the amount of money that they have to invest in the U.S., like I said, is going up in the next few weeks, but in legal fees as well, because you prepare 900 pages worth of materials and you submit it, and then it takes a couple of years for immigration to get back to you and then ask you a bunch of questions, sometimes about things you've already submitted that they haven't bothered to read. The employment route is something that we do a lot of, and that's usually advertising, showing the Labor Department you can't find an American, and then having the company show that they have the ability to pay the prevailing wage to the person, and that their degree and experience match with the job, and then finally that they can adjust their status in the U.S. because they didn't drop that college course back 10 years ago that immigration thinks they did. And then of course the marriage route is probably the least expensive of those. And it's I used to work for the Immigration Service many years ago, but I can sort of see things from their side. I would say about maybe 80 to 90% of the marriages are bona fide, they're real and so on. But there's another 10 to 20% where money may be passing hands and people may be paying off somebody. You're my friend, or I just met you on the subway or something. And how about if you marry me and we'll say we live together, and immigration will buy that. So it is the immigration examiner's job to, what they often do is separate people in different rooms and ask them all these very, very particular questions. We had a case, I represent an organization up in Northern California that just has run into a lot of trouble with immigration. And they had a young Russian couple. They were the same age, same religion. I had gone out to events up there and saw them, holding hands very far away from me. They weren't doing it to impress me. And they figured, why pay Carl to fly up to Northern California to go to our marriage interview? And when they got up there, because they were suspicious of the organization, they separated these people into two different rooms and asked them all these particular questions. I always tell people, tell the truth, don't volunteer, and don't guess. Those are my 3 rules. They ask them about the color of sheets on their bed, and they ask them whether they were striped or whether they were solid color. Now, if my wife would know, but I would, they asked me, I would say, gee, I don't know, I don't pay any attention to that. They both said striped, so you think, oh, thank God, like they both had the same answer. And what was the next question? The next question was, were those stripes vertical or horizontal? She said vertical, he said horizontal, and he was handcuffed within 5 minutes. And then I had to go up 3 times to Northern California to keep him from getting deported. And eventually we did win the case, but what a mess over that. So it's really, and the Immigration Service will typically use that same procedure in not only marriage cases, but in any case, if they, even an asylum case, they see a discrepancy. You said that the terrorist called you on the phone 4 times, and which was the time that they said X, Y, and Z? And you said, gee, I think it was on the 3rd call. It was 10 years ago. I think it was on the 3rd call. And they go, how come on your papers you said it was the 2nd call? So that is the strategy that the immigration people use, and I am so glad that I worked for them for a few years, because I feel like at least I can adequately know what to expect before we show up at one of these interviews. But I think in the last couple of years, the immigration agents have become more unleashed to ask those type of questions than before. And many more people are seeing denials. We're taking many more cases to federal court. We're also seeing a lot of delays in these cases. So we frequently go in, it's called a petition for writ of mandamus, where we say, we've paid the fees to the government, and it's now been 1.5 years, and they haven't made a decision, and we ask a federal judge to order them to do that. And usually, the assistant U.S. attorney gives in, and they just make a call to immigration and said, would you speed up this case, because I don't want to go to federal court and have to defend an agency that's not doing their job.
Your best advice is use solid white sheets.
Yeah, exactly.
You've seen the process become, there's been a little change in our government structure the last couple of years.
Right.
Is it becoming more efficient or more inefficient?
Oh, it's definitely more inefficient. They're asking a lot more questions. There's a lot more delays. There's a lot more requests for additional evidence. And I think the purpose is really to just slow things down, and people will, I can tell you for sure, like if, look at the companies like Apple, Facebook, Google, and so on. They're starting to call Vancouver Silicon Valley North, okay? Because they're in the law, there's restrictions under as far as how many people can get professional temporary visas to come to the United States. But there's also this, what I'm talking about, where they're just making everything more of a headache for people trying to get their green cards and so on. So these companies are like, we're getting tired of paying lawyers to pay this ping pong game with the government. Canada and Australia and Britain and a lot of other countries are totally accepting of our people. They want these people, high-skilled people, to come to their countries, and they're moving some of their operations outside the U.S. I think, who knows what this can do for the 2020 election, but the long run, that I think this is a very bad strategy for the company. We're turning away some of the best people.
All right, so Piper.
Yeah.
Can you discuss the impact of currency conversion on timelines and final balances regarding crypto and fiat currencies? And if you can explain what fiat currency is.
Yeah, okay, so fiat currency is any government-backed currency. It could be anything, yen, RMB, pesos, whatever. So a U.S. dollar, crypto, is anything like, there's 2,000 or more coins out there, but the main ones are Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple. There's also stable coins that are tethered to the U.S. dollar. I won't go down that rabbit hole. So you said settlement wise?
Well, that's the next question.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, sorry. So sorry. What was the question?
The impact of currency conversion and timeliness of final balances.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I mean, everything, all of my transactions have been through a regular escrow company, and I use two escrow companies that are set up with BitPay, and BitPay is basically a currency converter. They send out the invoice just like they would a wire transfer instruction, and so the buyer has 15 minutes to pay that. The Bitcoin is then locked into whatever price when they click the mouse and hit send, so that the volatility is no longer an issue. That gets wired to escrow, and BitPay charges a 1% fee. And one of the escrow companies that I use, they charge another 1% fee. So it's just 2% like taken right off the bat right there. This now if I'm dealing with another escrow company, say if the seller doesn't want to use my escrow companies that are already set up with this, then I have to get like super creative. Go to this bank out of London or like another company another bank that can do this conversion, and they charge 2% right off the bat. So we're looking at 2%, and then whatever the escrow company wants to charge for the extra pain. So that's just that. But usually when I'm dealing with buyers in cryptocurrency, they're all too happy to pay these fees. So
It's a buyer cost in these transactions.
It's usually a buyer cost, yeah, in these transactions. That's been my experience anyway. Now there are now online escrow platforms that you can do all of this through, and yes, they have their own conversion fees, anywhere from 1 to 4 to 5%. You can do everything online. I haven't, I like picking up the phone and talking to a real person, and if there's any hitch, that's one thing. But there are a couple of legit online escrow companies out there that will deal in several different coins and also fiat. But it just depends on how savvy the buyer and the seller are. If they're willing to communicate via blockchain technology. It's all that. But yeah, we're looking at anywhere from like I said, like anywhere from 1 to possibly 5 to 6%.
All right, and can you explain collateralized crypto loans and platforms supporting international and real estate transactions?
Yeah, this is kind of exciting, and this is going to be like I think a huge thing next year. There are just kind of like a little bit of a history. I'm sure everybody heard of Bitcoin, at the end of 2017 when it hit $20,000, and everybody was like, going crazy over that. Well, the futures markets were introduced, making that price go way down in 2018, and so it kind of sat at 3,500-ish, for a good year, and then it's been going up, a little bit this year. I think it hit like maybe 14,000. Now I haven't even checked today, but it like the last I checked, like yesterday, it was like 80 or 8,300 or something like that. So there is that crazy fluctuation, and a lot of buyers, because of this, have just been holding on to their crypto. They don't want to spend anything just yet, because there's all those reports that yes, it will eventually go back up to 20,000 and beyond. It's just kind of going through these growing pains. But right now, because of this, there are some really amazing platforms out there, and some of them are new. But there's the Gemini guys, the Winklevoss twins. They've got their own exchange. They're getting into this as well, of collateralized crypto loans. And what those are, and they basically, they hold on to your crypto, and then you can take the cash out and actually, buy really anything you want. So, and real estate is kind of a big thing with that. So, and that could also apply to, down payments. It just depends on who you bank with. There are several banks out there that are crypto friendly, so to speak, that will, take the U.S. dollars that have been converted from, Bitcoin, because usually that kind of like raises a red flag with a lot of these, big guys. So I want to know where it came from. But yeah, so, these investors now don't necessarily have to get rid or sell out their crypto. They can do like 50, 60, 70% LTV and, invest in property, and it's a non-taxable event. So that's kind of cool too.
So just to explain to the audience, can you talk a little bit about the technology behind blockchain, just so they can understand it? Because a lot of people don't
I
really
know, it's
understand what cryptocurrency is.
very elusive. I
And
know.
the importance of not losing your password.
Oh, God, yeah. That's bad too. And then hacking. So, yeah, so blockchain is the distributed ledger technology that powers cryptocurrency. So you can have blockchain without a cryptocurrency, but you can't have cryptocurrency without blockchain. And blockchain without any kind of cryptocurrency is a new form of record keeping. Many states have already passed this as a new form of record keeping. It's immutable. It's completely transparent. Once the information has been entered, it's there. And this is going to revolutionize title, escrow, obviously payments. There are, as far as the real estate sector is concerned, there are and platforms out there that are being developed. Proppy is one of them. They're kind of the leader in this. You can do an end-to-end transaction all using blockchain technology. It's still a little clunky because each state has their own disclosures. Where I went through a whole transaction demo with them, and yet we're still using PDFs in one portion of it, but it's still all that information is still entered on the blockchain. Now, 3 to 5 years from now, we're going to be able to take all of those disclosure rules and program them into blockchain technology, into smart contracts, and you won't be able to. You can enter all that information. It'll automatically be populated. You can tell it, which rules, what the contingency, what the contingencies are, any type of other, rules that apply to this particular transaction. That can all be programmed in it, and it can basically be automated. And it's also public information, but obviously keeping pertinent information, seller information like social security numbers, all that stuff hidden. So yeah, that's basically what it is. It can. I see it, like I said, in the next 3 to 5 years, potentially making our jobs a lot easier. Not disintermediating, but definitely, furthering the escrow process. Shortening it, I should say.
And what happens if you lose your password?
You are, yeah. There are ways of recovery, but you have to go through several layers of verification. And sometimes, if you just lose it, sometimes, depending on what exchange you're using, you're out of luck. Yeah.
Safe or a good place to hide your password?
Yeah, I would definitely keep it in a file. Keep your seeds. The seed questions. Sometimes I have a Trezor, which is a cold storage. And God forbid if I ever have to reboot the thing, I've got my seed words that I have to enter, without any mistakes, or else I'm just locked out. So yeah, yeah.
Hey, Greg, you want to discuss a little bit about what some of the bigger companies like Wanda are doing, and how there's been a departure of trophy properties from Los Angeles to other areas?
Well, as I said earlier, in general, there's sort of been a retreat of Chinese investors from the U.S. landscape. And that's largely been an inability to bring more capital here. And so Wanda, which own the One Beverly Hills site, the site next to the Hilton and the Waldorf, sold that earlier this year to the people who own the Hilton and the Waldorf. Anbang, which is a big Chinese insurance company, and they had bought the Strategic Hotel portfolio, sold that earlier this year to a Korean group, actually, Mirai Asset. So, as I said, the maturing market cycle has resulted in a change in the landscape. You have some investors who were in early on beginning to take the profits off the table. Some of the Chinese groups that are sort of caught ocean-wide has a huge project in downtown LA, which is one of 5 or 6 big projects all over the country, all like that, all strapped for cash. It's a big problem. It's difficult to fix one without fixing them all. But at the same time, what we're seeing is a shift, because we see a lot of capital coming from Canada now. Canadian pensions some are sellers, but more buyers. A lot of capital coming from the Middle East now. So what I'd say is it's a shifting landscape. Probably overall numbers are down in terms of just overall volume for foreign investment, but the shift from sources in Asia to Canada and the Middle East is underway. And then also what we're seeing is a shift from equity to debt, mezzanine loan funds, and other debt funds. We're beginning to see equity capital work their way into those, thinking that it's either shorter term or safer than being on the equity side.
And are you also seeing these larger investment companies going outside big cities like to Oregon, Portland?
Yeah, well, it's also that part of the cycle where what we used to call California satellites, Oregon, Portland, Phoenix, all begin to do well as the cost of real estate in California becomes prohibitive. The other change, though, that may be more fundamental is just the age of the U.S. population. I think this year, for the first time in the United States, you have more people 65 and over than 5 and under. So, that shift, and when you consider how much money the U.S. spends on health care, so I think that you have older Americans beginning to downsize and move into more service-oriented housing, and that's probably well-timed, as you've had sort of a delay in household formation at the millennial end, which is now, with the improved employment picture, beginning to pick up. But what I would say is that you're going to see a lot of age-related spending, whether it's real estate or other forms of the economy. Some people might say that things like Uber and Lyft are seniors companies, but I do think that healthcare elements will work their way more and more into real estate. In fact, despite actually good numbers, a lot of retail centers are failing as retail centers, and we're seeing the sorts of non-traditional users that are beginning to go in are health and medical related companies.
Excellent. Carl, what's the biggest takeaway from today's presentation?
Well, I'm interested in the audience, because we've been talking, and I'm wondering, what things are resonating with them, and what things we might be saying that are like, flying over their heads. I think that just to take up on what Greg said, I think that the aging of the U.S. population actually plays a big role in the immigration part of this. A lot of the things that we've specialized in is representing healthcare companies all around the country, and there's the shortage of registered nurses is supposed to grow to over 1 million by the year 2021, and the number of physicians, over 1/4 of the U.S. is considered by HHS to be medically underserved. And who are the doctors who, there's a program where I think they will take some of your tuition loans and repay them if you're an American doctor, and you'll go into these underserved areas. And there's also a program for foreign doctors. Foreign doctors, no matter how many years they've been in practice, when they come to the United States, they come on a visa called a J visa, and they have to do their residencies and fellowships in the U.S. So you can be a world-famous surgeon, but you can't practice in the U.S. until you work 80 hours a week for a few years doing a residency and a cardiology fellowship. And then you have to go back to your country for 2 years, except there's an exception with that if you work in a medically underserved area for 3 years, you don't have to go back to your country. And most of the doctors do that, and we get them, it's called J-waiver programs. And I could never understand, because I'm not dealing with American doctors, I'm dealing with foreign doctors. Why don't the American doctors just go to these areas, have their tuition waived? Until my son graduated from medical school. And then, of course, he wanted a nice home in the suburbs where his kids would be safe and go to nice schools and all of that. He was not going to, the areas areas in California, Calexico or Imperial Valley or Delano or someplace like that. I always have doctors that are they're from India or China or whatever, and they're willing to go to those areas. And that would, I didn't even ask my son because it was so obvious that would be the last place in the world that he'd want to go to, okay? And yet, the numbers of doctors and nurses that we can bring in to the United States from other countries are so restricted that, when you're talking about 1 million nurse shortage, the nurses that we're going to be able to bring into the United States, if we're lucky, will be in the tens of thousands, not even in the hundreds of thousands. So it's not going to solve the nurse shortage, not going to solve the physician shortage. So I think the biggest takeaway is, I know there's, that immigrants have been blamed in our political climate for a lot of the things that have gone wrong in the economy. Your father worked for GM on the assembly line and made $80,000 a year, and now you're working at Walmart for $12 an hour. We got to deport these people to Mexico, and then you're going to be fine. That's really an improper way to look at immigration. Immigrants have, they can have a significant impact on easing our shortage of healthcare professionals in the United States. If you look at the biggest IT companies in the U.S., you'll see that 1/4 or more were formed by immigrants to the United States. I think that, number one, we have to look at immigration as a positive, but we have to transform our immigration system so that this is one thing that I find that I actually agree with the president's talk. I don't know whether I agree with the walk, but I agree with the talk. We should have a more merit-based system. Just like because somebody is a brother or sister of a U.S. citizen doesn't mean that that person's necessarily a desirable immigrant to the U.S. Maybe yes, maybe no. If somebody goes into a visa lottery, that's a totally random way of picking people. Our system is a very small percentage, maybe 15% is merit-based. I'd like to see a system that's at least 50% merit-based. I mean, families should be able to stay together, but we need more engineers, more computer programmers, more doctors, more nurses. So if just something to think about from the immigration perspective.
Interesting. So Piper, just kind of your final takeaway before we go to questions. And maybe you want to talk about the volume of cryptocurrency and how large that's gotten over the last couple of years and how it's becoming more established.
Yeah, it's not going anywhere, guys. In fact, it's going to get, it's going to become more mainstream, as the years go by, especially, blockchain technology. And I guess, I say this all the time, so forgive me if you've seen me before and I sound like a broken record. It's here to help us, not disintermediate. That's my belief anyway. It's, like I said, it's going to make us, our jobs a lot easier as far as, verification, and, these platforms that are going to be showing up in the next few years. I would definitely, become educated on these. And it's at the risk of self-promoting, this is not really, but if you are interested in learning more and becoming more of a part of this, blockchain part of real estate, there is a place that we have meetups. It's called the International Blockchain Real Estate Association. This is a real thing. I would just go to a meetup and then just look up IBREA. I'm lucky enough to be the LA chair this year. And our president is actually in LA, and he's just a wealth of information. His name is Henry Elder. But we're trying to have monthly, if not bi-monthly, meetings. We've got these great guests and people from these platforms that come in and do demos. So it makes it a little bit more tangible. For any other education, I'm more than happy to give you sites and links and all that stuff. So my biggest takeaway is for you guys is just don't be afraid of it. Just educate.
All right, Greg, I know you had a lot to say. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about or how you see the future of the real estate market in regards to global investment.
Sure. Well, at this point in the market, I talk to people. Half of them tell me that the market is on the verge of a recession or a correction, and the other half tell me that nothing's wrong, and the 2019 is going to look a lot like 2015 or 2016 did. And to be honest, they both sound right when I talk to them. So it has, I think, the biggest takeaway as to why it's hard to tell right now is that you don't hear stories of anybody getting hurt yet. But I would tell you that most of our clients who have done development projects over the last 3 or 4 years have probably been over budget. They just have not had a handle on where labor and material costs have gone over the last 3 or 4 years when they started. They just couldn't have predicted it. But it hasn't been a problem because they also didn't predict where rents or sale prices went either. So they are covered. And the problem's going to be for the next 3 or 4 years, you're not going to be able to do that. So I think you're going to see some projects, and we're seeing it with some of the Chinese projects. I mentioned the Oceanwide project. We'll see some projects where maybe there's some slippage, and I think that'll bring some caution into the marketplace. But on the flip side of that, everybody knows how long it takes, on the development side, to build something in California. And so we have a lot of clients who look at 3 or 4 year, 5 year or longer timelines from start to finish. And they figure, we'll build through this correction. Interest rates are low. Fundamentals are still strong. Housing is always going to be something that's needed in California, most people think. So, and again, there's just tremendous amount of public spending in the greater Los Angeles area that will help that economy. So, I think that it's a time when everybody needs to be cautious. And I would remind everybody that everybody sees a recession in the rearview mirror. They don't see it coming. But the flip side of that is, you can just ask people in Australia. There's no reason that an upcycle can't go for 20 or 30 years. So, we will see. We will see.
All right, well, now we're going to open it up for questions. I think, Ben, you want to? Yeah, mine's dead. Yeah, my battery went.
Hello? This one's for Piper, Doug Christensen, England Walkers. In regards to crypto and blockchain, hey, get used to what happened. Are you more talking about blockchain, necessarily crypto? How do you view with Bitcoin kind of, I would imagine you'd call it a cryptocurrency is with the fluctuations and, I don't know, if it's more international. How do you view crypto as more common? And then blockchain, how do you view it as, is this something that's going to affect us in a way that we need to be proactive outside of just learning it, but it's really, that's going to change how you work. It's just going to make things more efficient, speedy. Sorry about the long questions.
No, that's fine. Okay, hopefully I can address everything. You might have to interject. But as far as blockchain is concerned, I liken it to, say, Google. We don't know the algorithms, behind Google. We don't know all that technology. We leave that up to the Google people, and so, but we know that when we type in something in Google, we're going to get a result. We don't have to know the inner workings of blockchain to reap the benefits of it. So as far as and neither are going anywhere anytime soon. Yes, Bitcoin, crypto, probably a lot more popular overseas. I'll get on that tangent here in a second. Back to blockchain, though, like I said, many states have already voted on, this and made this new form of record keeping legal. How that's going to trickle down to the municipalities, it's a whole other thing, because that's where we become involved. Like, each municipality has its own, rules and taxes and this and that. So it's going to take a very long time for that to trickle down.
Is blockchain privatized, or
No,
is this
that's
is all
the whole
government
thing.
based?
Well, the government can, build on blockchain. So the cool thing about blockchain is that it is decentralized. There is no centralized server, that you need. Yes, you need passwords and private keys and all that to access information. But why blockchain is such a revolutionary form of record keeping is that it is decentralized. It gives the power back to the people, and rather than having to necessarily pay gatekeepers to access this information. And you can, by and large, rest assured that the information that you are accessing is true and hasn't been tampered with. So, as far as title is concerned, in a perfect world, there are title companies that are already on top of this. There's going to be a day where you can look up, a title to a property, everything that's gone on with that home, since day one, and keeping those records, safe and publicly available. Now, crypto. What was your question on crypto?
Just ultimately the popularity of crypto, and it sounds like it's more so overseas, but
Yeah.
where do you really see that? Personally, I'm kind of late to technology. It doesn't mean I don't use technology.
Yeah, we all are.
Right,
Yeah.
but where this really comes in, especially when you're talking about, the U.S. dollar and fiat currencies in general versus crypto, which seems kind of mysterious.
It is mysterious, yeah, there's a lot of information out there, and some of it's wrong. A lot of it's wrong. But where this comes into play, and especially in international markets, the cool thing about crypto is it's an alternative to a failed banking system. You're seeing this, the disenfranchised actually able to invest in crypto and make a little bit of money and not have to deal with a corrupt banking system in their country. Venezuela is, crazy as that is. I mean, they've gotten their own, cryptocurrency. Ireland, Greece. This could potentially, getting rid of all the other corruption, potentially, save economies. So, it's, and like I said, there are over, 2,000 coins out there, and yes, governments are getting involved. So it kind of it almost negates the idea of having a decentralized currency. But, at the same time, it is an alternative to, say, a failing fiat currency in that particular country. So, we're all kind of just finding our way with that right now.
How about, though, as just a tool of settlement, right?
Yeah.
In a real estate world, I may own some real estate. I have a corrupt, future failed bank probably as a mortgage lender, and it wants to get paid off with dollars.
Yeah.
And so, there's a part of me that wonders if the fluctuation in value is something that is a negative in terms of people looking at it as a means of settlement, right?
Yeah, and
I just want to be able to know that I'm going to get what I'm
yes.
supposed to get, pay who I'm supposed to pay, end up with the profit I thought I'm supposed to get.
Yeah.
Or vice versa, pay the amount I expect to pay and not
That's-
get caught in that.
Yeah, in the loop of,
20,000 or maybe
right.
50,000.
Yeah, and what I would say to that, and like I said, the whole process is still very, very clunky. But if you were doing a crypto to crypto transaction, I would be so specific in the contract. At the time of closing, say if you're taking Bitcoin, I wouldn't take these crazy altcoins. By the way, I would only do the standard, maybe Bitcoin, Ethereum, and maybe Bitcoin Cash or gold, but that's really it, because side note, I do get people calling me saying, hey, I've got $1 billion in this coin I've never heard of, I want to buy a bunch of LA real estate. It's like, well, that's great. You're going to have to transfer that. You're going to have to convert that to Bitcoin because I'm not going to deal with this other coin and nobody else will either. And eventually that's going to be going to cash anyway. But back to the contract, I would say, at the time of closing, 5 o'clock on, this day, whatever, no matter what Bitcoin is doing, if it's $1 million condo, it's going to be $1 million condo. If at the time of transfer, if we're $100,000 short at the time of closing, then we're going to make up for that. But at 5:01, say if Bitcoin tanks, that volatility is now on the seller. That's their problem now. Up to that point, it's on the buyer. So you can be long, you can be short, and if it's long, then maybe the seller can give the buyer credit or something like that. So there are ways around it. You can totally hedge it. Yeah, yeah.
I have two really basic questions. Is it easier for Chinese or other countries that have limited amounts that they're allowed to take out to buy through Bitcoin? Could they take out more than 50,000 or?
In theory.
In theory.
Crypto right now is still illegal in China,
Okay.
but they're moving it, to Singapore, to Hong Kong,
Okay.
all that. I did actually have someone contact me. I believe it was last year. It was a family friend of someone, a very wealthy businessman in China. Who knew nothing about Bitcoin, that wanted to buy Bitcoin, get it out of the country, and then, and so I'm explaining that it got way too complicated because I don't want to have that responsibility,
Yeah.
Especially if I'm 3 people deep and there's a language barrier. So, but the the solution to that would be like a hot swap. But they pay an exorbitant amount of money to, it's, 5%, on the banking end. But, as Greg said, there's other consequences to that as well. So it depends on like how bad you really want that money out of China.
And my second question is, why wouldn't somebody that has a ton of money in Bitcoin just put it into dollars and then buy real estate? Why would you do it within the transaction?
That's a great question. Sometimes, not always, the bank, once it's seasoned. That was my very first transaction. I had no idea what I was doing or how to do it. I just had this buyer in Manhattan Beach that wanted to buy a $3 million house in Bitcoin, right? And, so I call my lender, and he's like, well, just have him transfer it to cash and have it seasoned for a couple of months. And I'm like, well, he wants this house now. So that's not an option. So, there's the immediacy, there's the time, so yeah, they can totally do that. But there are tech guys out there, people that don't like U.S. banks, and they just want to get the deal done, and they can do it through, a payment processor, so. Yeah.
As a realtor, I've been around a long time and use the term disintermediated, right? Which is really where our jobs get, minimalized and like other companies can bring in employees and do our job, right? Yeah. So anytime I hear that something's going to become simpler, that's my first worry. So I'm interested when you said blockchain may make our job, it won't hurt our jobs. It couldn't make it simpler. So when I hear simpler, I think trouble. Why? Tell me how it won't be that way.
Well, and again, I'm talking in the next 5 to 10 years. God knows where we're going to be in 10 years. Especially with all this iBuyer and Amazon, everybody's getting involved in real estate. I have no idea. But one of my colleagues who are really heavy into the blockchain real estate space, we're going to, he foresees this, and I agree with him, we're going to be more like project managers rather than, the day-to-day dealings that we did. Like right now, we're herding cats, it's like we've got, vendors all over the place, we've got disclosures that are just, we've got to pull together, and oh my God, I forgot this one, and I need this one, So we can have everything in one place. In theory, with these platforms, you can give permissions to all the parties involved, but only certain permissions, like the buyer and the seller only see certain things, the lender only see, but you've got everybody talking on the same platform and communicating, this is a really good, I've got a couple of them, but this is a really good example. One transaction, we had a shortened appraisal contingency. And, we would get busy with stuff, and, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I haven't heard from the bank, about this appraisal, what's going on? So I call them, and we've got like maybe 2 days left, and he goes, oh, well, I never got the contract. I'm like, what do you, I sent it to you days ago. What do you, and it, I looked in my spam folder, and it had bounced back 5 times, and I never even knew it, because it was a huge file. And, so like that, like, yeah, we're doing everything, e-cigs and PDFs and emailing this and that, but that's still old school, it's as far as, technology is concerned, and real estate is, very slow to adopt. And, once we do adopt this technology, hopefully it will be a lot easier. I won't and I thought, God, if this were on like a blockchain platform, I would have never had that problem. They would have immediately gotten that information. The appraisal would have been ordered. We wouldn't be having this. Now I'm not, everybody's not scrambling around now. So, that's just like one little thing that's just going to like make it easier for everybody.
Do you have unique provisions, contract provisions to deal with cryptocurrency and blockchain?
I'm just not. I do an addenda, I just make sure everything is just so specific, like I said, if you're doing a crypto to crypto transaction, these wallet addresses are, like 16 digits long, and they're alphanumeric, and they're like, capitalized, not, and so you need to be very specific about, I would even put the address in there so everybody's on the same page, and just, God.
Who bears what cost and who bears.
Exactly, yes.
So, yeah, the lawyers have to catch up too.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
He's bringing the mic.
There you go. So everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a question regarding the immigration visas. If you're a European citizen, but your birth origin is from the banned countries, like Iran, for instance, are you able to obtain a U.S. visa? Is this hard? Because I hear that that's like an issue.
Yeah, you're not, if you're a European citizen, then you should not be covered by the travel ban, even though your birthplace was in Iran.
Yeah.
So you should be able to apply for a visa.
That
Yeah.
shouldn't be a problem. Because I've been hearing this. I have friends in Europe, and, they used to come here and travel, just, for travel, and they're from the banned countries right now. So we were just talking about that, and they said we won't be able, they're not even trying, but they said they were just, said they're probably.
Yeah, it's very much of a mishmash. If, for instance, if you're from Iran and you're in the U.S., let's say you're on a student visa or something like
Yes.
that, and then you marry a citizen or you get a green card offer through a job, you can get the green card despite the travel ban. The travel ban only applies to people outside the U.S. who are Iranian citizens, but not like you bring up. If you're a citizen of a European country, then the travel ban no longer applies to you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
You're very
I
welcome.
appreciate it.
I have a question for Carol. Do you have an idea what is the percentage for each immigration category?
For each country, did you?
No, each category. For example, 15% is like a marriage for marriage,
Oh.
or do you have that numbers in mind?
Well, it's sort of complicated. I can't say I have it all in my head, but so I can give you some numbers. I can't give you the exact percentages, but the number of people who can come as relatives, and this is outside of marriage. I'll go to marriage in a second. Is 226,000 people a year sponsored by relatives. The amount of people coming in through jobs, and including the EB-5, which is investor category, but they put that in the EB-5 means employment-based fifth preference category. Those categories are 140,000 people. The number of people who come in as immediate relatives, so that could be marriage. It could also be people who are citizens applying for their kids, and it could also be people who are citizens applying for their parents. That's unlimited. Last year it was about 300,000 people coming into the U.S. The amount of refugees is set yearly by the president. Traditionally, that's been about 100,000 a year. In the last fiscal year, which just ended on September 30th, it was cut by the present administration to 30,000 a year. And now they announced that the number of refugees is going to go to an all-time low this fiscal year of 18,000. Yeah. And then there's a lot of, tiny little categories. For instance, people who get asylum. Refugees are people who are admitted from abroad to come to the U.S., who have a well-founded fear of persecution. But if you're in the U.S. and you apply not for refugee status, but for asylum status, and there are several 100,000 people in immigration courts right now that are applying. Let's say, 40,000 of those people at least will eventually get asylum, and their family members will join them. So does that give you sort of a overview? Okay. Okay.
I have a question for Carl. We have a friend of the family from Germany, got a PhD in London and coming to work in New York. what is the process and timeline for him to be able to maybe eventually become a U.S. citizen after the green card? Is that possible?
So is he coming in on a green card or a temporary visa?
Probably temporary, I'm not sure.
Okay, yeah. So
But
that,
working in New York, yeah.
Okay, so, and there's a lot of different temporary visas, the H-1B for professionals, O-1 for people of extraordinary ability, and a lot of stuff in between. But let's say he's coming on a temporary visa. So either, you said he's coming as a professor, or?
Computer science.
Oh, computer
working for a
science,
company,
okay.
yeah.
So computer science, the company, if they can't find a if they can show that they cannot find a minimally qualified American, and they'll have to show that by advertising the job in paper newspapers and online, okay? And then they can, that's the first step in sponsoring him for a green card. Then they also file a petition with immigration showing that they have the funds to pay him and he has the appropriate qualifications for the job. And then he also applies for the green card showing that, he's not a criminal or a terrorist or hasn't committed immigration fraud or anything like that. So yes, they can sponsor him for green card. When he gets the green card, his spouse and any children under 21 unmarried are allowed to get their green cards at the same time. And then the usual process for U.S. citizenship by naturalization is you wait 5 years after you get your green card. Actually, you can apply 3 months early, so 4 years and 9 months, and then you can apply for naturalization, okay? I should mention in naturalization, if you're married to a citizen, then there's an exception. You only wait 3 years instead of 5 years. And if you serve in the military, you don't have to wait 3 years or 5 years. When you're finished with basic training, you can apply for a naturalization. Okay?
Thank you.
Sure.
I'm sorry, is it Greg? So I was pretty amazed at the stat, if you said that in this country, there's more people 65 and over, right, than 65 and under. Oh, then 5 and under. Okay, that's what I'm going. That's impossible. Okay. Well, that still means there's lots of people that are in that older category. So as a realtor, any suggestion, and most of us probably do residential and maybe small commercial, any suggestion what we should do going forward? Should we slightly change our focus, or any suggestion?
Well, as I said, I think that there's more emphasis on, for older people, on service-oriented housing. So whether that's, senior housing or
Like care homes? Oh, yeah.
You're even seeing campuses where you go from basically active adult all the way to skilled nursing or beyond. And instead of having to find a new place to live, you just move to part of the same facility, like a campus. You still know the same people. Actually, I think a pretty smart idea. On the, and then for younger investor or buyer, I think people are buoyed right now by what they see as a strong household creation. It's been delayed for some years, but they're getting it now. The stars are aligned. So maybe that coincides with your senior crowd using downsize. So people are optimistic about the housing market going forward. I would say, an interesting fact in China, as I said here, it's more people 65 and over than 5 and over. But in China, there are more people 65 and over than 15 and over. And so, along with a lot of other, a couple of other big cultural or social irregularities that we're kind of going through That's normal. I mean, I have a lot of clients in Asia, people in the hotel business, they show me, robots that people are making that will do everything. I don't mean like stand behind a desk and, I mean, clean everything, clean bathrooms. It's a problem. I mean, in Japan, the population at the end of this century in Japan will be half of what it was at the beginning of this century.
Wait, say that again?
The population of Japan at the end of this century will be half of what it was at the start of this century. Half.
What? That's amazing. Why? Why?
Low birth rates, no immigration in. I mean, immigration for a lot of reasons is not a bad thing, but especially in a society where people are getting old, where we're used to being taken care of, I think the healthcare needs are a perfect example of who's going to take care of us.
Wow. Thank you. Go ahead.
In regards to, I run into people about this permit to work, and I think it's called an HS. It's like a 5-year. They have to apply for it in this country. What's that again? Yeah, H-1B. Looking at them as prospective homeowners, when you get an H-1B, is that something where you go, you know what, these guys are probably going to be here for quite a long time, or is it like, depending on politics, how do you?
Yeah, so I think H-1Bs are pretty good prospects for homeowners because the H-1B themselves, they're limited for most employers to a quota of 85,000 a year, but the needs of U.S. businesses are way higher than that, so they apply for over 200,000, and they have a lottery every April to see who gets chosen. But the people who are getting chosen, they're people that these companies really want, and most of them, let's say, I don't know, I don't have the exact figure, but I would say the great proportion of them will be sponsored for green cards by their employers. What's happening now, and it's very much in the minds of, at least my colleagues and the big tech companies, is that the majority of H-1Bs in the last few years have been from India, and there's no quota on H-1, well, there's a numerical quota on H-1Bs, but not a per-country quota. So that's why over 50% are IT workers from India. Go ahead if you want to enter.
And what's the risk of those individual H-1B to go back to their countries, kind of like similar to having students come here, get education, and then they go back to their countries and basically live there?
Yeah, so very few people from India who get selected for H-1Bs do go back to their country. It's the people who come over here as students and don't make it through the H-1B lottery who go to Canada or other places. So they get sponsored by their company, and here's the big problem with them. I mean, it's fine for realtors, it's gray hairs for their employers and for them, is that there's over 500,000 of them waiting in line for green cards because the immigration laws have this 7% per country quota. So maybe 55% of them are who get H-1Bs are from one country, from India. Then when you try to feed them into the green card stream, it goes down to 7% a year. So their waiting times could be 30, 40, 50 years to get a green card. So they have a bill, I won't go through it right now, but they have a bill that was voted on without any committee hearing through the House of Representatives, and they tried to get it recently through the Senate on a unanimous consent resolution, and that has failed, and now there's a huge fight over how they're going to do this. But as from a realtor's perspective, I mean, these are people who are going to be staying for the rest of their lives in the U.S. because it may take them a couple generations just to get their green cards. Yeah.
So I'm not sure if this is a question for Greg or for Carl, and thank you for coming back to the South Bay to speak again. But question is, if we have foreign sellers, what advice would one or both of you give for the shortest route to them either reducing the withholding upon close of escrow or actually getting that withholding back once they have determined what the true taxable amount is, as opposed to the, like 18% of sales price that usually would have to be withheld?
Yeah, I don't think that's within my expertise.
Real estate, the U.S. entity, form an LLC, real estate.
But after the purchase, though, I'm talking about for a seller now who wants to sell the property relatively quickly.
You could transfer it to a holding out. I mean, you could create an entity that would be the entity that settles out your U.S. tax debt. So it would be responsible for whatever taxes are owed. It files a tax return. You could, and then behind that, again, ultimately you have an individual who owns that, or maybe just loan the money to that entity to own the house, and then you'll take that, loan. So there may be some ways to structure it from a tax standpoint, but the best way is, for a non-U.S. taxpayer is to have a U.S. entity. And that's because if you're a non-U.S. taxpayer, you don't want to get sucked into the U.S. system of dealing with withholdings, right? You just don't, because then all of a sudden your activities outside of the U.S. become more under the purview of U.S. authorities. So most non-U.S. taxpayers, they would prefer to just form a U.S. entity, let it be the point where taxes and other cost issues get dealt with. And then what happens beyond that stays, what happens outside the U.S. stays outside.
From a timing perspective, realistically, how quickly could they form that LLC and transfer it versus just applying for an ITIN number and then filing their taxes and waiting for the refund check?
You can form an LLC in a day, right? I mean, in Delaware, you can form them overnight. So not a problem in California if you pay an expedited fee, you can do it in a couple days.
So an LLC doesn't have to season before you can sell it?
And then just transfer it right away. And if you own that LLC, then there's no transfer. So yeah, I mean that would be the instruction.
Thank you.
Over the last few years, I deal with commercial properties, light industrial properties and such, but the majority of buyers have been foreign-born individuals, and I've seen in the last several years a real uptick in people from Iran buying property. We've closed several, including one this year. Is that with the instability in that region, would you expect that to possibly increase over the next several years?
Absolutely. I think the Middle East, Canada and the Middle East are where you're going to see most of the foreign investment.
Okay, and then also the difficulties that we've had, at least in one that comes to mind this year, was they were also traveling in Iran, and there were communication issues as far as even with the internet and such, and just a general flow of funds. And do you especially Iran and some of those other countries that are not as stable as they might be, do you think that'll become more of a problem into the next several years?
I think, yeah, you'll see more and more. I mean, people who have funds will try and get them set up outside.
Mm-hmm.
That uncertainty is why money comes into the U.S. And even when the U.S. creates the uncertainty, the money still comes to the U.S., right?
Mm-hmm.
Because money wants certainty. In terms of communication, internet, I mean, I go to China a lot. I can't go on websites that we would just take for granted
Mm-hmm.
to go on. So, I mean, it's a controlled internet. I have to have somebody get me on the, if I'm in a hotel, they want to know your mobile phone number. They want to to access the internet. So,
Mm-hmm.
and then when you access it, it's not what you used to. So,
Yep.
I think it's interesting because I think we're all going to get used to it, a different idea of privacy with technology.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
This is more of a general question to the panel kind of going into foreign investment. Is there any studies or percentages that we hear about foreign investors buying real estate and just parking and not even homes are vacant, that type of thing? Have you heard of anything in regards to what percentage that truly is that they're vacant? And have you also heard anything about, obviously, with the housing crisis in California, about potential repercussions for those type of properties to get them either moving back on the market or?
I know, like in Northern California, Berkeley and Oakland are starting to pass laws if your house is vacant, they fine you for it. So I think you're going to see more stuff like that. People who are unwilling to put their houses on the market due to rent control or whatever, when the city starts to find them.
I mean, I don't think it's a huge number of people. I mean, I remember talking with somebody, an investor from China, and I was marveling at how, it was 3 or 4 years ago, just how much money was coming. They were just buying. And this guy had literally said, "Oh, I saw a house on the internet, and I bought it last night on the internet." It's like, what? But, I think that was an unusual phenomenon where you had, I remember saying, well, what is the motivation? He said, we're doing it because we can. And we all know at some point they're going to say you can't anymore. What's happening? And while we can, we will, right? I mean, we can get money out of China to buy stuff here, we will.
But what does that
Because
say about?
one day we won't be able to.
What does it say about China and their economy when that's?
China's economy is in tough shape. I mean, it is. It's not, tariffs don't help it, but China's economy was in bad shape before tariffs. I mean, real growth in China was probably just a couple percent, nowhere near what they were saying. And they embarked on this Silk Road project, which, by some accounts is a $60 trillion, endeavor, and they have maybe $1 trillion of reserves and currency that no one else, not no one respects, but it is not a world currency. So, China, and they have a lot of old people in China who need to be taken care of. So, China has its issues, but I do think the idea of like how people were buying things almost on a whim was, and maybe it was a whim, but I think a lot of it was just the ability that they could do it, that they could do it. I mean, right now I have clients who that's unusual. EB5, right? I mean, EB5, you mentioned, has been around since 1990. I mean, seemed like something that was almost created when it was created. But for a few years, it was a China program, and for a few years, it was so oversubscribed. Never before, right? I mean, you had too many applicants.
Right. Something like 80% of the applicants were from one country, from China, and because there's 10,000 people a year who can get green cards through EB-5s, and because they weren't filling all of that, China was getting about 80%. Now, the China backlog is over 14 years to get a green card, so all the immigration attorneys that concentrated their practice on EB-5 China are now branching out to other countries all over the world.
Are they talking about lifting the number of people from EB-5 countries, the limitations?
Not the number of people, but the per country quotas, yes. Yeah, so that, but then because China's so backlogged, it would all go to China. So that's our controversy about the EB quotas. The investors would go to China, the workers would go to India, but it would backlog every other country in the world. So Senator Durbin recently from Illinois introduced a bill that would dramatically raise the number of people who could get green cards. And that's what we are for as immigration attorneys. We don't want to see, we think it's unfair for Indians and Chinese to suffer this long backlog. I mean, think about it. Those are the two most populous countries in the world, and they have the 7% quota. So they have the same quota that Luxembourg or Monaco has. I mean, it just makes zero sense, right? But when you have so many people now backed up in line, that if you're just going to take off the per country quotas and not increase the amount of numbers, that's basically going to screw everybody else in the world by doing that for years. So, I mean, the answer is to raise the number of employment-based green cards at the same time as you take off the per country quotas, but that is hotly debated right now. I don't know what's going to happen. We're covering it in our newsletter on a monthly basis. Yeah.
I will take one more question.
One more.
I just didn't know if there was somebody else in the room who hasn't asked one yet who wanted to raise your hand, otherwise I'm speaking. Okay, Piper, I am missing a big picture question here about cryptocurrency. Maybe I just don't understand the concept enough, although your colleague did a great job at the CAR Global Forum as well of presenting things.
Thank you.
But I want to know for U.S. residents, whatever status they may be, what in general, why would they prefer to use it versus just standard currency? I mean, I understand the concept of currency hedges in places of political and financial volatility like Venezuela, Greece, Ireland. That makes a lot of sense to me. I don't understand why an American would necessarily, or a U.S. resident would necessarily prefer cryptocurrency. What are some of the benefits, I guess I'm asking?
It just depends on what their motivation is, honestly. Like, I have one client that just can't stand traditional banking. It could be just as simple as that. A lot of these when I say investors, I mean, what's that?
They're mattress savings people.
Some of them. Well, yeah, and then there could be. They're also, along those lines, we've got the cannabis business also. That is a mattress money business because the feds won't recognize that cannabis is illegal, basically, with the feds. But on the state level, it's not, and they're all cash businesses, so they've got all this cash that they need to convert. And there are people out there for, a substantial fee can take that, mattress money, so to speak, and convert it into crypto. So crypto and cannabis are very closely related, or they can be. There's also, these tech guys out there that, invested way early on in Bitcoin, and they back in, 2009, 2010, they invested, a few $1,000s, and now they're millionaires, so, and they like the crypto aspect, and they're day traders, and they just know how to make money. And so they'll take that and they once they learn that they can actually buy high ticketed items with their crypto that's not just sitting there, they will do it. Not so much right now because of the volatility of the market, but now like I said, I'm expecting to see a lot more movement in 2020 with these collateralized loans, so they don't have to cash out. But yeah, I mean, the motivation could be anything from just not having banks to having a ton of crypto, and needing to offload it. I mean, it's still, like I said, it's still a taxable event. I mean, you're still having to report all of this stuff. I mean, you can take your chances, but I wouldn't. But yeah, I mean, the motivations vary. But that's in my. What's that? No. It's totally taxable. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I had a client who would buy art. He was in Asia and then send it to New York and the auction season auction it off. And that was his way of making money.
Wow.
So, I mean,
yeah, you could totally do it in art.
ago.
Yeah.
The point is that
yeah.
it's, there is an efficiency factor that's missing when you have to do that, right?
Exactly. And then you have to, because that's a whole other, wormhole that you go through. It's like, you got to be really careful because the SEC, is watching, all these, especially these platforms and these tokenized, real estate platforms and all that. A lot of it is offshore. They don't even want to deal, with U.S. Investors because, the SEC will crack down on it and make it very difficult. So there's that too.
One last question.
I did have one last question. I think we all have clients who are older and they have a lot of equity in their houses and they won't sell because they will not pay the tax. Would an LLC help them?
No, I mean, it really won't because ultimately they own the LLC. I mean, the LLC will be either as a taxpayer or if they own it, then they are the ultimate taxpayer.
Okay.
But I believe there are, if they're downsizing, they can roll into real estate and keep their basis so that from a tax
Yeah.
standpoint,
Yeah.
they're not hurt by doing that.
In this area, when people have lived someplace for 40 years, they have $1 million or $2 million. They have a lot of money that they just can't bear to pay the tax on. Yeah, you said somebody has to pay it.
I mean, I guess it beats the alternative. I just had a client and he called me 1 year and he was so upset at how much tax he had to pay. And when he told me how much tax he was paying, I was like, wow, congratulations, you've got a great year. You must have made a lot of money this year. He just could not understand that outlook.
I just sometimes think that would free up a lot of property that older people would move.
Absolutely. I think that's right.
You guys, that was an awesome discussion. I enjoyed it. Fascinating. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, because it's like